building a skilled, compliant workforce for iGaming markets.
I am Jaime, the founder and CEO of iGaming Academy. With me is Yuliya, who is my colleague. She's also our head of compliance and DPO. And today we're going to be talking about, that is the right slide. Yep, creating a compliant workforce and skilled workforce within the gaming space. So, just to give you a bit of context about who we are and what we do, we're the leading training provider in the gaming space, primarily when it comes to iGaming and retail betting. We train over 75,000 employees on a yearly basis across 50 different countries and 25 different gaming jurisdictions. However, when it comes to stats and information that we tend to follow as an organization, this really is different from what other suppliers and operators are after, right? Operators and platform providers would be after information around their GGR, around their NGR, their cost per acquisition in terms of players. For us, it's all about the FTE market, full-time employee market. And because of that, we've done extensive research around understanding the employee market within the gaming space, and that being across all these different markets and continents to really understand, what is the potential in terms of employee opportunity, what is the potential in terms of growth, and where are the biggest challenges when it comes to employment, resourcing, and upskilling. Okay. Now, sorry guys, I can't see the screen here. Just bear with me a moment. So really we looked at four main market groups that we focus on as a training and educational institute. This is the Asian markets, naturally where we are today, but also the Americas and European markets, and then what we call the emerging markets, being Brazil and many other similar markets to that. So from our perspective, we've done a lot of research around understanding the employee market. The US itself does tend to have the higher number of employees working across the gaming space. We're close to 1 million employees working within gaming operations, both online and land-based. Second to that is UK and EU, followed by Asia, keeping in mind that in Asia, roughly 50,000 employees are based in Macau alone. So, that is the smaller pool of employee markets at the moment, and then emerging markets being areas like Brazil. Okay. When it comes to adapting training relevant to the different gaming topics, so we've been working on this for over 7 years. We have over 100 different gaming-related courses, starting from compliance and regulatory topics, moving all the way into skills and product training, okay? But, through the thousands of employees that we've trained, and we actually issue over 250,000 certificates every year, we really categorize this type of training in 3 hierarchies. The first one being that sort of entry-level industry knowledge, introduction to gaming products, product training around casino and sportsbook management. We then move up the food chain into general compliance and regulatory training. And then on the top layer, the sort of the C-suite training is more focused around regulatory C-level training, and also master classes for C-level and directors as well. So now I'll pass you on to my colleague Yuliya, who will be talking about compliance trends and insights primarily around regulation.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. When it comes to compliance requirements, you need to understand that training is not something that you're doing voluntary. It's something that you have to do to fulfill the licensing requirements, compliance requirements, especially in the regulated markets. And currently the landscape with regards to compliance requirements and the licensing requirements is changing constantly, so you need to monitor it, to be up to date all the time. Some of the trends, first of all, more jurisdictions are now regulating gambling, especially iGaming space or prohibited gambling, and introducing more restrictions in terms of their nationals and citizens being able to access the offshore websites. And this leads us to the situation when most of the operators, when operating cross-border, have to apply for multiple licenses. And then multi-licensing type of the operation leads to very complex corporate structure. And this also leads to the increased compliance requirements to operate several brands at the same time and running sometimes dozens of skins across the globe. Then the second trend connected to this is the requirements for the risk assessment, because risk-based approach is now the center of all the daily operations, and the risk assessment becomes stricter and stricter. We are not only need to do the business risk assessment when we apply for a license, now we also have to do the risk assessment for the money laundering. All our operations needs to be based on the level of risk the customers might present. We also do the risk assessment in the responsible gambling and the player protection sphere as well, and these also leads to the increased fines for the non-compliance, and as a result, the minimum capital requirements for businesses willing to apply for the iGaming license also increase. The recent example was the increase of minimum capital requirements for businesses in Malta. Apart from this, we have the liability of the senior management, and this is something new and something we need to pay attention to, because with the introduction of the Six Money Laundering Directive in the EU, all senior managers of the companies, including directors, then the board of directors as well, they are now personally liable for the operations of the company and any failures with the compliance requirements, and these brought us to the necessity to introduce special trainings, vetting, probity checks for the senior management across the industry. Then the responsible gambling is a completely different story, because we see lots of statistics published around the problem gambling, people having issues in controlling their gambling, sticking to the budget, and so on. Globally, statistic around the problem gambling doesn't really look too bad, because it's approximately 1% of the global population who consider themselves as regular players, 0.5% of those who can be classified as problem gamblers with a diagnosed problem. But in some countries, on the national level, the national statistic varies from 2 to 6% of the country population, people who are gambling regularly and have issues to control it. And this gives regulators an opportunity to introduce stricter requirements. So they advocate with this data and introduce requirements for additional loss limits. They increase the age from 18 to 21, with the recent example being Belgium. They also introduce the obligatory financial thresholds to protect the vulnerable category of the customers between 18 and 24. They introduce affordability checks, which are not voluntary any longer, they are now a requirement. So all this brings us to the situation when our personnel needs to be well aware about the RG requirements. And sometimes in the well-regulated markets, the requirements may change pretty much every year.
So, yeah, look, that's really interesting. I think looking at this table, and if you really put things into perspective, right? You know, if the gambling industry were 100 people, 0.5, half a person would be considered to be a problem gambler. But if you look at the emphasis around problem gambling in the industry by regulators and on how much it highlights it, you know, this is a far lower statistic than what you would see within the drinks and beverage industry, right? Where you're talking about drink responsibly and what is the percentage of alcoholics versus non-alcoholics. It's such a low percentage when you look at problem gambling as from a global perspective. And this is what I find interesting. There's so much investment, so much effort, so much awareness around responsible gambling. You know, some markets do it better than others. I think the UK does it too well, but whereas other markets could do it a bit better. But the problem is there, but it is a fraction of what the industry is at the whole. You know, protect the minority, but keep in mind that there's a lot already going on when it comes to by protecting that minority.
Yes, you do need to protect the minority, but also it comes alongside with the stigmatization. So gambling in some markets is considered to be something frowned upon. So the regulators try to introduce the requirements based on the national statistics on the problem gambling, plus on the national statistics on the average household incomes. So they do introduce the financial limits, loss limits, deposit limits, the thresholds for checking their affordability. The recent example again being Netherlands, or for example the deposit limits in Germany. So when they take the national statistics and try to introduce the requirements and everybody has to comply on the industry level, then the introduction of new high-risk payment methods is also, I wouldn't say a problem, but a concern for the regulators across the globe. For example, the acceptance of cryptocurrencies, and in the last panel it was already mentioned. When we start accepting cryptocurrencies, the regulation of the cryptocurrencies comes alongside with the increased requirements for the anti-money laundering and for anti-fraud and payments. Apart from this, operating cross-border is not an easy task because you need to navigate between the requirements in various jurisdictions while well connect your brands and different company offices and branches together while trying to make this compliant with the reliance and outsourcing requirements, which is not easy as well. So all this really brings us to quite dangerous situation when you can get a fine for pretty much anything.
Yes. So, you know, when does it become overregulation? So we've been working with, you know, hundreds of operators over the years, and, you know, you find in some cases there are operators who do take advantage of overcompliance, right? If you actually see the stats around how many people are actually able to withdraw their funds after winning a substantial amount of money, it's less than 50%. Because when it comes to the withdrawal stage, that's when the regulation comes in. So you can empty your credit card on deposit, but when you want to withdraw, that's when you start to see the regulation come into force. But is it because the players are being safeguarded, or is it because the operators are capitalizing on that deposit fund? So, you know, that's something which I think tends to be a bit of an oversight. So this next slide is really interesting, and this is one that, you know, every operator and platform provider should be aware of. The amount of fines being issued in all of the major gaming markets, it just keeps growing, right? It's the highest amount of fines we've seen in a year was last year. But we'll see what happens at the end of this year to see what the figure ends up being like. But Yuliya, I mean, there's a lot to say about this.
I think the figures are horrible because in comparison to 2022, last year in 2023, we had the 42.3% increase in fines, 42.3% in the annual basis. This is horrible. And then if we calculated the iGaming sector itself, not calculating here land-based, the retail, they lost $442.6 million, which is a lot. Like, it's a horrible number for non-compliance requirements. And as in year 2022, the UK was the strictest regulator because the UK Gambling Commission issued the fine, which broke their own record, and the fine was approximately £19 million for the non-compliance with money laundering and RG requirements, as well as the responsible advertising requirements.
And who is that for? Rather not say.
It's not our client, that's the most important.
Yes, definitely. So on a final note, understanding your regulations through different methods, right? And naturally, training is one of those methods. So yeah, Yuliya, would you like to add on these topics?
No, I think the most important is to point out that the requirements will vary from one jurisdiction to the next. But you need to be aware about the anti-money laundering requirements in the jurisdiction where you operate to make sure that your frontline employees and anybody who gets in direct contact with the players or supervise the transactions, the thresholds, somehow connects to the transactions. They need to understand the money laundering requirements as a minimum, customer due diligence, ongoing monitoring, reporting suspicious activities and transactions. And then on the responsible gambling side, this becomes even more complicated because money laundering requirements are pretty much stable. So if you provide a thorough training, then you're good with the annual refreshers in the majority of the countries. But when the responsible gambling, first of all, you need to, from the recent updates, approximately like 2 years ago, they introduced additional requirements for the frontline employees to be able to identify the players who might have the problem gambling. So to identify the players of concern, those who can be at risk. Then again, customer interaction, customer communication. All the customer-facing employees need to understand how to talk to people showing the signs of distress, agitation, depression, problem gambling, not being able to keep to the financial limits, which is not easy and requires usually a specific communications training. And again, not everybody will be suitable to fill this position because it's emotionally very intense role. Then player protection tools also vary from one jurisdiction to the next. So we don't have the best approach. Unfortunately, each and every regulator will have their own specific requirements. And when it comes to responsible advertising, we'll pretty much see the trend to ban the advertising, restrict sponsorships, ban advertising, especially the games of chance. Games of skill are doing a little bit better, but the games of chance really in danger. So ban on free bets, ban on demos, not being able to demo the games to the vulnerable categories of customers, so the young people under 25. Data protection requirements are also pretty important, but thanks God, data protection requirements are pretty much unified across the globe, which is amazing. And then cybersecurity and information security becomes extremely important recently as well. And the regulators would love to see the proof of you providing some awareness within the company.
Yeah, I think we've run out of time here, but just on a final note, having a bit of a regime around training of employees, both from a B2B and a B2C perspective, is also a means, and this is sort of going against our main focus, but it's also a means of safeguarding your own organization, right? Because if you show proof of training, and if there's misconduct or if there's errors that are done by a certain employee in how an employee handled a case with a player, the company itself does have a level of safeguard because you have provided that training. And we've seen this in many cases. Proof of training is a part of your compliance requirement. But yeah, that's really it from our end. So thank you very much, Yuliya. Thank you, everyone. We're here if you have...
Just would love to say that you need to be aware about your personal responsibility, because if you're the senior manager in the company, you are personally liable for the behavior of your employees and for the non-compliance. So remember about this, always.
Don't worry, that's not scaremongering, everyone, okay? You should sleep well tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.